The world ended in silence. The gunshots, the screaming, the splintering of wagon wood. It all stopped as suddenly as it began, leaving only the high, thin wind of the Colorado uplands. Clara Shaw lay pressed against the iron banding of an overturned water barrel, her lungs burning. She had not breathed, not moved. For how long she could not say. The smell of black powder and something metallic, something hot, filled the air. It was the smell of death. She kept her eyes squeezed shut, praying to a God who had clearly abandoned this rocky pass. She prayed for her father, who had been shouting at the oxen when the first shot rang out. She prayed for her mother, who had pulled her from the wagon bed, screaming, "Hide, Clara, hide!" There was no answer but the wind. Slowly, her body shaking so hard her teeth rattled, she opened her eyes. Dust motes danced in the slanted yellow light of the late afternoon. The attack had been fast, brutal. The rocky hills near the New Mexico border had offered no defense, only echoes. A shadow fell over her. Clara choked on a breath, pressing herself flatter. A man grunted, speaking words she did not know. A moccasin, worn and stained, stepped into her line of sight. He grabbed the barrel and tossed it aside as if it were kindling. Clara stared up at him. He was tall, his skin the color of burnished copper, his hair long and black. He wore buckskin leggings and a calico shirt, likely taken from another traveler. His eyes were flat, assessing, holding no pity. He looked at her, then shouted to others. More men appeared. They were not a great war party, she realized, but a small, ragged band. They moved with purpose, scavenging the wreckage. They pulled bolts of cloth, sacks of flour, and rifles from the smoldering wagons. One of them grabbed Clara by the arm, hauling her to her feet. The calico of her dress, her best dress saved for the journey, ripped at the shoulder. She stumbled, her legs numb. "Pa?" she whispered, her voice a dry crackle. "Ma?" The man shoved her forward. She saw them then. Her father, Silas, lay near the dead oxen, his chest a dark, wet ruin. Her mother was near the back of their wagon, her face turned toward the sky, her eyes open and empty. Clara's mind went white. The shock was a mercy, a thick cotton blanket wrapping around her brain, insulating her from the reality of it. She did not scream. She did not cry. She felt nothing at all. They pulled her along, away from the wreckage, away from her parents, away from the bodies of the Harts and the Millers, who had shared their coffee just that morning. She walked. When she stumbled, they dragged her. When she fell, they kicked her, not with malice, but with the same impatience they showed a stubborn mule. She was property now. They traveled for hours, climbing higher into the rocky hills as dusk turned to a cold, purple twilight. When they finally made camp, it was not a village, but a temporary stop. They were moving, migrating. They tied her. The rawhide was stiff and dry. It bit into the skin of her wrists, cinching them tight behind her back, tied to a pole that supported a large, painted tent. It was not a teepee, but a longer, ceremonial structure. She sat in the dirt, her torn dress exposing her shoulder to the cold night air. The man who had tied her checked the knot, grunted, and left. She was alone, surrounded. The camp was alive with sounds that terrified her, a language of sharp consonants and guttural stops, the barking of lean dogs, the cry of a baby. Women moved around the fires, their faces hard to read in the flickering light. They glanced at her, some with open curiosity, others with a flat hatred that made her stomach clench. She was dehydrated. Her tongue felt thick, her throat sealed with dust. But more than the thirst, more than the pain in her wrists or the ache in her shoulder, was the cold, hollow numbness. Her mind kept replaying the image of her mother's open, empty eyes. Behind the canvas of the tent, she could hear men arguing. Clara leaned her head back against the rough pole, closing her eyes, trying to listen. She understood nothing of the words, but the tones were clear. One voice was harsh, angry, punctuated with sharp gestures she could just see in silhouette against the firelight. Another voice was lower, calmer, seeming to barter or reason. A third, older voice spoke only occasionally, a deep rumble that seemed to quiet the others, but not convince them. They were deciding her fate. The angry one, she guessed, wanted to trade her. To whom? For what? Whiskey? Rifles? The thought made her skin crawl. The calmer one, perhaps, saw her as leverage. A white woman was a bargaining chip, something to hold against the soldiers who hounded them. The old voice, she could not guess, but when he spoke, the anger in the tent seemed to bank, like ashes cooling. She heard a word repeated, Shema, a sound of unease. He was the elder, she realized, and this fractured band was acting without his full sanction. He was uneasy. He saw her, not as a prize or a tool, but as a problem, a woman suffering. The argument ended. The men emerged. They did not look at her. The camp settled. The fires burned low. The cold seeped in. A deep, penetrating chill that found every tear in her clothing. She shivered, but the numbness held. She was a stone. She was a tree. She was already dead, just waiting for her body to realize it. 200 miles south, in a mud-walled trading post near the Rio Grande, Elias watched a fly crawl across the rim of his tin coffee cup. The air in the post was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, tobacco, cured hides, and the sharp tang of cheap whiskey. He sat alone at a small table in the corner, his back to the wall. It was a habit he never broke. Elias was a man built of contradictions. He had his Apache mother's high cheekbones and night-dark hair, but his father's eyes, a strange, pale hazel that seemed out of place in his sun-darkened face. He was quiet, but his stillness was not peaceful. It was watchful. He moved like a shadow, and in places like this, he was treated like one. The white trappers gave him a wide berth, muttering half-breed when they thought he could not hear. The few Navajo and Pueblo traders who came in offered him no kinship either. To them, his white blood marked him as other. He belonged nowhere, and in the territories, a man who belonged nowhere learned to see everything. He caught the rumor the way he caught the scent of rain, a subtle shift in the air. Two trappers, stinking of beaver fat and whiskey, were talking low. You've seen her north of the San Juan, Utes maybe, or Jicarilla. Alive, you say, a white woman. That's what the Navajo runner said. Took her whole wagon train. Just her left. Elias sipped his coffee. It was bitter, boiled half to death. A white woman taken. It was a common enough story, one that usually ended badly. It was not his business. He had come for cartridges and coffee, and planned to be gone by noon, heading back to the high country where the silence made sense. The door of the trading post swung open, letting in a rectangle of blinding white sunlight. A man stood silhouetted in the doorway, blinking as his eyes adjusted to the gloom. He was dressed in a fine black wool coat, dusty from the trail but clearly expensive. He wore a city hat, not a cowboy's. The man scanned the room, his gaze passing over the trappers, the grizzled proprietor, and landing, finally, on Elias. Elias did not move. He just watched the man approach. "Pardon me," the man said. His voice clipped and Eastern. He stopped a polite distance from the table. "I am looking for a man named Elias. I was told he might be found here." Elias took another slow sip of his coffee. "Who told you?" The man seemed relieved, if still nervous. "The proprietor, Mr. Slocum." He gestured to the man behind the counter, who was pointedly ignoring them both. "My name is Arthur Abernathy. I have come from Santa Fe. I need to hire a tracker." "I'm not for hire." Elias said it flatly. He did not like men like Abernathy, men who came west with soft hands and heavy purses, expecting the land and the people on it to bend to their will. Please, Abernathy said, his voice dropping. The desperation was plain now. It is my cousin, my aunt's daughter, Clara Shaw. Her wagon train was bound for Arizona. They were attacked near the Cimarron. Elias looked down at his cup. The Cimarron. That matched the rumors. She's dead, Elias said. It was not cruel, it was a fact. We do not know that, Abernathy insisted, stepping closer. The soldiers found the wreckage. They found my aunt and uncle, but they did not find Clara. There was no sign. The coyotes, or the men who did it, they would not leave her. I have this, Abernathy said, pulling a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket. He laid it on the table. It was a handbill, hastily printed, a reward. $500 in gold. Elias looked at the sum. It was more money than he had seen in 5 years. It could buy him a ranch, a herd, a new life. He felt nothing. No, Elias said. Abernathy's face crumpled. He looked like a man about to break. She is just a girl, 20 years old. She was kind. She was traveling with her mother. That one word, mother, struck Elias like a knife in the ribs. It found the one place in him that was not calloused over. He thought of his own mother, dead 10 winters now, buried on a hillside facing east, with only him to mark the spot. He thought of her, driven from her people for marrying a white man, then abandoned by that same man, left to raise a son who looked too much like the man who had left them both. Elias looked at Abernathy's trembling hands. He hated this. He hated the desperation, hated the money, and hated the memory that Abernathy had accidentally unearthed. But the image of a girl, alone, her mother gone, that was a chord that resonated. He pushed his coffee cup away. I will look, Elias said, his voice low. Not for the gold. I will find her, or I will find what is left of her. You will pay me $50 for my time. Either way. Abernathy nodded, relief and fear warring on his face. Yes, of course. Thank you. God bless. Do not, Elias said, standing up. He was taller than Abernathy, leaner, and the simple, quiet movement made the Easterner take a step back. You stay in Santa Fe. You wait. If I find her, I will bring her. If I do not, you will have your answer in 2 weeks. He walked past Abernathy, bought his cartridges and a sack of coffee, and left the trading post without a backward glance. The $500 in gold meant nothing, but the girl's ghost, that was something he was already tracking. That night, Clara dreamed. She was not in the cold, rocky highlands. She was home, back in Ohio, in the kitchen of their small farmhouse. The air was warm and smelled of cinnamon and baking bread. Her mother, Sarah, was at the table, her hands covered in flour, her face soft in the lamplight. She was humming a tune Clara had not thought of in years. Ma, Clara whispered in the dream. Her mother looked up, her smile the warmest thing Clara had ever known. There you are, child. I was worried you were lost. I am lost, Clara said, the tears finally coming, hot and fast. I am so lost. Her mother just smiled, holding out her floury hands. No, you are not. You are right here, now. It is time to wake up. Clara, wake up. Clara's eyes snapped open. The dream dissolved instantly, snatched away by the brutal reality. The kitchen was gone. The warmth was gone. Her mother was gone. There was only the cold, the dirt, the sharp bite of the rawhide on her wrists, which were now raw and bleeding. A sob, dry and racking, tore from her throat. She choked it back, burying her face against her knees, shaking uncontrollably. The numbness had cracked, and the grief was a physical weight, pressing the air from her lungs. She was going to die here, tied to a pole, in the dirt, alone. A sound made her freeze, a tiny scuffing, like a mouse in the dust. She lifted her head. A child was standing just outside the ring of dying firelight. A little girl, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, wrapped in a tattered blanket. She stared at Clara with wide, black eyes, full of a fear that matched Clara's own. Clara said nothing. She could not. The girl took one hesitant step forward, then another. She looked quickly over her shoulder, toward the sleeping tents. Then, moving fast, she darted forward and placed something on the ground just within Clara's reach. It was a small, unglazed clay cup. It was full of water. The girl backed away, her eyes never leaving Clara's, and then, as silently as she had come, she vanished into the shadows between the tents. Clara stared at the cup. It was a miracle. It was an anchor. She shuffled forward, her body aching, until she could lean down and touch the cup with her lips. The water was cold, gritty with dust, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever tasted. She drank it all, slowly, letting the moisture soothe her cracked throat. It was a small gesture, a secret, a drop of humanity in a desert of cruelty. As the cold stars wheeled overhead, Clara leaned back against the pole. The terror was still there. A cold snake coiled in her belly, but for the first time since the wagon stopped, it was not the only thing she felt. Elias moved north, following the sun's shadow. He did not follow the main trail, but kept to the ridges, reading the land below. He found the attack site on the second day. It was just as Abernathy had said. The wagons were burned. The bodies had been buried by the soldiers, marked by crude wooden crosses. The ground was littered with the debris of broken lives. A shattered porcelain doll, a ripped Bible, a man's boot. He knelt by the graves, his hat in his hand. He felt the familiar ache. So much waste, so much blood spilled on this hard, unforgiving land. He left the graves and began his search, circling the site, moving outward. The soldiers had seen nothing. They had looked for boot prints, for wagon tracks. Elias looked for what they did not understand. He found it, a quarter-mile east, a single small glass bead, cobalt blue, half buried in the dust near a patch of scuffed rock. A trade bead, not Ute, not Navajo, Jicarilla, maybe, or a fractured band, as the rumors said. He found a place where a horse had stood, and the animal had chewed on a piñon branch. The branch was still wet inside. They had passed this way within a day. He began to track them, his pace steady, relentless. He moved through dry riverbeds, his eyes scanning the pebbles for a single overturned stone. He climbed the high hills, noting the way the brush was broken, the path of a group moving fast, trying to escape notice. This was where he was most himself. He was not white, he was not Apache, he was just the tracker. His mother had taught him this. She had taught him to listen to the birds. Their silence meant a man was near. She had taught him to read the wind. It carried the scent of cook fires miles away. His father, a smooth-talking trader named Silas Kane, had taught him English and how to feel ashamed. He had given Elias his name, but not his protection. When the other white children in the settlement had called Elias Injun and savage, his father had looked away. So his mother took him back to her people. But her people, seeing his pale eyes and his father's name, saw only the man who had abandoned one of their own. The other boys tested him, pushed him, called him White Eye. He had learned to live in the space between. He learned to be quieter, to see more, to need less. He learned to vanish. Now, he followed the trail of the men who had taken Clara Shaw. He moved across the land not as a man, but as a ghost, a quiet, vengeful memory. He did not know if the girl was alive. He did not know if he could save her. He only knew that he had given his word, and that she was like him, lost between two worlds, alone in the wilderness. Time ceases to be a river and becomes a puddle. It sits, stagnant. Clara measured her days not by the sun, but by the aching of her joints, the deepening of the sores on her wrists, and the slow, agonizing return of her senses. The numbness that had saved her in the beginning receded, leaving every nerve raw. She was tied to the same pole behind the ceremonial tent. She was still property. But she was alive, and the part of her that wanted to stay that way, the stubborn, deep-rooted part, had begun to watch. She learned words, not by asking, but by listening. The camp was in constant motion, a migration, stopping every few days to hunt or rest, then moving on. She learned tuo, the word for the water the little girl sometimes brought her. The girl whose name she learned was Tadiba. She learned hago, a sharp command to come, usually when they untied her feet to walk to the next camp. She learned nida, go, a dismissal. She learned the sounds of their arguments, the same voices from the first night, still debating her fate. The angry one, a warrior named Eshki, saw her as a tool. The elder, the shaman, Hastian, spoke of her as a burden, a disruption to the Hozho, the balance of their world. They were a broken people. She saw that now. A small band that had fractured from a larger tribe, pushed by soldiers and starvation onto these high, cold rocks. They were as desperate as she was. This realization did not make her feel safer. It made her feel more precarious. She watched their rituals. At night, the men would sometimes dance. It was not for joy. It was a low, pounding rhythm. The drum a heartbeat in the earth. Their voices a deep chant that seemed to pull power from the very stones. At first, the sound had terrified her. It was the sound of the men who had killed her mother. But as the weeks passed, she began to listen differently. She saw the women, their faces lined with weariness, watching the dancers with a desperate hope. She saw the children huddling close. This was not a dance of victory. It was a dance of survival. They were asking the barren land to keep them alive. Clara, tied to her pole, found herself breathing in time with the drum. She learned to sit still, to not pull against the rawhide. To pull was to feel the burn, to remind herself she was trapped. To be still was to exist inside her own mind, a place they could not tie. She would close her eyes and pretend she was just a stone, part of the landscape, feeling the vibration of the drum pass through her. One afternoon, the old man, Heston, the shaman, came to her. He was ancient, his face a map of sun-scorched wrinkles, his eyes clouded with cataracts but still sharp. He did not look at her with the anger of Eshki or the flat cruelty of the others. He looked at her with a weary, assessing distance. He carried a small bowl and a feather. He mumbled something, words she could not grasp, and he lit a small bundle of herbs. The smoke was sharp, smelling of sage and something else, something sweet. He fanned the smoke toward her with the feather, not touching her, but washing the air around her. Clara held her breath, afraid. He spoke, his voice like gravel. He used his own tongue, but he pointed. He pointed at her eyes, then at her chest. He said a word, K-os. Then he said it again, Ka-os. He looked at her for a long time, then turned to the woman guarding her and said something. The woman looked surprised, but nodded. Later, Tadiba, the little girl, crept near. She held out a piece of dried meat, a theft from her mother. "What did he say?" Clara whispered, her voice rough from disuse. Tadiba knew some broken English, picked up at trading posts. "He say, fire. You have Ko's, soul fire." The girl pointed to her own chest. "He say you do not break, captive soul fire. He see it." Clara stared at the girl. Captive soul fire. The words settled over her, a strange and heavy blanket. He had not blessed her. He had simply named what he saw, the stubborn, unquenchable thing in her that refused to die. It was the first time since the attack that anyone had looked at her and seen anything other than a body, a prize, or a problem. After that, things changed. Slightly. They still tied her at night, but at dusk, just as the sun bled its color into the western cliffs, the woman who guarded her, Tadiba's mother, would untie the rope from the pole and, holding the end of it, motion for her to walk. She was a dog on a leash, but she was walking. Those walks became her church. The high desert air was thin and cold, burning her lungs, but it was clean. It was the only time she was not sitting in her own filth and despair. She would lift her face to the enormous, aching sky, watching the first stars appear, cold and sharp as glass. The landscape that had been the backdrop to her family's murder began to change in her eyes. It was not cruel. It was just true. The blood-orange cliffs did not care that she was grieving. The wind did not care that she was captive. The land was ancient, hard, and beautiful, and it would be here long after she and her captors were dust. This strange, cold comfort calmed her. She stopped thinking about the past. She stopped praying for a future. She learned to just be, in the fragile, cold moment of the dusk. She would watch the hawks circle, listen to the wind, and just breathe. Elias saw her on the third day of his watch. He had been tracking the band for 2 weeks, following the faintest signs. A broken branch, a displaced stone, the cold ashes of a small fire. They were moving carefully, avoiding the soldier patrols and the main trade routes. They were scared. He found their camp in a high basin, protected on 3 sides by sheer rock walls. It was a good defensive position, but a terrible trap. He lay on his belly on the ridge opposite, 1,000 yards away, hidden by a snarl of juniper. For 2 days, he did not move, save to shift his weight. He watched the camp through his spyglass. He mapped their routines. He counted the warriors, 12. He counted the women and children. He noted the guards, one posted at the narrow entrance to the basin, one who roamed the perimeter. His heart was a cold stone in his chest. He had seen no sign of her. He assumed he was too late, that he was tracking a ghost, that he would return to Abernathy with nothing but the news of her death. Then, on the 3rd evening, as the light turned thick and purple, he saw her, a woman in a torn, pale dress, walking slowly near the edge of the camp. A guard held her on a rope. Elias pressed the spyglass to his eye, his hand suddenly unsteady. It was her, Clara Shaw. Her hair was matted, her face thin, but she was walking. She was alive. He watched as she lifted her head, staring at the sky, her expression one he recognized. It was the look of a person who had given up everything but the simple act of breathing. He watched her keeper pull her back toward the large ceremonial tent in the center of the camp. He saw her stumble. He saw them tie her to the post outside, like an animal. She was not being tortured, not in the ways he had feared, but she was not free. A cold, quiet anger settled over him. It was not a hot rage, but the precise, focused anger of a craftsman. He had a job to do. He waited. The camp slept. The fires burned down to red eyes in the darkness. The moon was a bare sliver, offering just enough light to see shadows, but not enough to expose him. He checked his knife. He checked the cartridges in his revolver, then settled it back in the holster. He would not use it unless he had to. A gunshot would bring the whole camp down on them. This had to be silent. He slid down the far side of the ridge, circled the basin, and came up from the south, using the cover of a dry wash. He moved like smoke. His moccasins, a gift from his mother years ago, made no sound on the rock. He reached the edge of the camp. The perimeter guard was hunkered by a small, dying fire, his head nodding. Elias waited. He let the man's breathing grow deep and steady. Then he moved. The guard never heard him. Elias's hand covered the man's mouth as his knife found the space between the ribs, deep and true. There was a terrible, brief shudder, a muffled gasp, and then the man went limp. Elias held him, easing him to the ground in the shadow of a boulder, pulling his blanket over him as if he were only sleeping. He felt the man's last, warm breath on his hand. It was the part of the job he hated, the necessary, awful part. He wiped his knife on the dirt and moved on. The central camp was quiet. The ceremonial tent was dark and tied to the pole, just as he had seen. was Clara. She was asleep, or trying to be. Her head slumped forward, her body curled against the cold. He knelt in front of her. The smell of wood smoke, sweat, and fear clung to her. He put his hand on her shoulder. She woke instantly. Her entire body jerked. A silent, convulsive scream. Her eyes flying open, wide and white with terror in the gloom. She scrambled backward, pulling against the ropes so hard the poles shook, her breath hitching. She thought he was Eshki. She thought her time was finally over. "Be still," he whispered. The words were English. Clara froze. The sound of her own language was a physical shock, so alien in this place. She stared at the man kneeling before her. He was a shadow, part white, part native, dressed in canvas trousers and a dark shirt. His face was unreadable, his pale eyes catching the faint starlight. "I am here to take you home," he said, his voice barely a breath. "Do not make a sound." He pulled his knife. Clara flinched again, pressing her back against the pole, her mind screaming. He did not move toward her throat. He moved toward her hands, tied behind the pole. He sawed at the thick rawhide. It was stiff, baked hard by sun and sweat. The rope snapped free. Her arms, numb and locked, stayed in place. He moved in front of her, grabbing her wrists. "Give me your hands." She could not. She could only tremble. He took her wrists and began to work on the ropes that bound them together. The rawhide had cut deep, caked with dried blood and dirt. It was embedded in her skin. As he pulled at the first knot, the stiff hide tore at the raw wounds. Pain, sharp and blinding, shot up her arms. A low, desperate sound escaped her. "Please," she begged, her voice a dry crackle. She was not begging him to stop. She was begging for it to be over. "Please, loosen the ropes." Her words hit him harder than the guard's death. Her wrists were tiny, like a child's, and they were ruined. His large, rough hands, which had just taken a life, suddenly felt clumsy, brutal. He stopped pulling. For just 1 second, he held her hands, his grip firm but not harsh. "I know," he whispered. "Hold still. It is almost done." He worked the blade under the knot and twisted. The rope snapped. Her hands fell, useless, into her lap. "We have to go now," he said, his voice hardening again. He was all business. He pulled her to her feet. Her legs, weak from weeks of disuse and poor nutrition, buckled immediately. She collapsed against him. "I cannot," she whimpered, the ground spinning. "You can," he said. He was not gentle. He hooked one arm under her legs and the other around her back. Lifting her, he cradled her for only 3 steps. Just enough to get her clear of the tent and into the shadows, then set her on her feet, holding her up by one arm. "We walk. Do not make a sound." He half dragged, half carried her. They moved past the sleeping forms, past the dead fire. Clara focused only on his back, on the feel of his hand gripping her arm, a pain that was real and present and meant she was moving. They reached the sleeping guard Elias had killed. Clara's breath caught, but Elias pulled her forward without breaking stride. "Do not look," he commanded. They cleared the camp. He led her into the dry wash, then up onto the rocks. He made her walk on solid stone, where her torn boots would leave no scuff marks. He guided her through thickets of manzanita that clawed at her dress but covered their tracks. He moved with a purpose and a silence that was unnatural. He was, she realized, a creature of this hard land, just as much as the men she had left behind. They moved for hours. The moon set. The darkness was total. Clara stumbled, fell, and was hauled back to her feet. Her lungs burned. Her legs were shaking so badly she could barely stand. She was running on the captive soul fire the shaman had seen, and it was burning out. Finally, just as the first hint of gray touched the eastern sky, he stopped. He pulled aside a curtain of old, dead roots hanging over a washout, revealing a dark opening in the rock. A small cave, barely a hollow. "In," he said, pushing her. Clara crawled inside and collapsed onto the dirt floor. The adrenaline that had held her together drained away, leaving her a shivering, aching heap. She was free, she was safe, and she was utterly broken. Elias did not enter immediately. He covered their tracks outside, then slid into the shallow cave. It was not deep, but it was hidden. He sat, his back to the wall, his rifle across his knees, watching the entrance. Clara lay curled in the dirt, shaking from the cold and the shock. She watched him. He had not even looked at her. He was listening. After a long time, he seemed satisfied. He reached into his saddlebag, which he had carried on his back. He pulled out a piece of oilcloth. Inside was a handful of dry kindling. With his flint and steel, he struck a spark. A small, smokeless fire caught, the wood so dry it barely hissed. The tiny flame lit the cave. She saw his face clearly for the first time. He was young, maybe 30. His pale hazel eyes were fixed on the fire, his expression grim. He reached into the bag again and pulled out a long strip of jerky. He tossed it to her. It landed in the dust near her head. She stared at it. Food. Slowly, her hands trembling, she picked it up. She lifted it to her mouth. It was salty, tough as leather, and it was the best thing she had ever tasted. She chewed, the simple mechanical act of it anchoring her to the moment. The warmth of the small fire touched her face. The taste of salt was on her tongue. The man was breathing quietly across from her. She was alive. Her mother was not. Her father was not. The dam broke. It was not the scream she had held in for weeks. It was a silent, agonizing flood. Tears streamed from her eyes, soaking the front of her torn dress. Her shoulders hitched in silent, racking sobs. She cried for her mother's empty eyes, for her father's body by the oxen, for the weeks of terror, for the pain in her wrists, for the horrible, beautiful taste of the jerky. Elias did not move. He did not speak. He did not offer comfort. He just sat on the other side of the fire, his rifle steady, and let her cry. He guarded the entrance to the cave, and he gave her the space to mourn the world she had lost. He let her cry until the sky turned from gray to a pale, bruised blue. He gave her no comfort, offered no kind words. He just sat, a sentinel, letting her grief pour into the dust of the cave floor until she had nothing left. When her sobs finally quieted into dry, hitched breaths, he kicked dirt over the small fire. "We move," he said. They traveled for 3 days. The first day was a silent agony. Clara's body was a map of new pains. Her legs, which had carried her for hours in the dark, were now stiff and weak. Her feet, protected only by the thin, torn leather of her boots, were blistered and raw. But the worst was her wrists. The rawhide burns, now exposed to the air, felt like they were on fire. Elias set a relentless pace. He moved south, away from the high basin, keeping to the rock-strewn ridges and the dry, gravelly beds of ancient rivers. He seemed to know, instinctively, where the ground was hard, where it would hold no print. Clara followed, a few steps behind him. She watched his back. He moved with a frightening economy of motion. He did not seem to walk on the land. He seemed to pass through it, a shadow that belonged there. The silence between them stretched, pulled thin by the wind. She was still terrified of him. He was a man who had killed without hesitation, a man whose eyes held a stillness that was not peaceful. But he was also the man who had spoken English in the dark, the man who had cut her loose. On the second day, her thirst became a desperation. Her tongue was thick, her throat cracking. She had not had water since the sip in the camp. 2 nights before. She stumbled, falling to one knee. "Please," she rasped, her voice barely a whisper. "Water." Elias stopped. He turned, his pale, hazel eyes assessing her. He was not angry, just measuring. He unslung his canteen, uncorked it, and handed it to her. She drank, the water hot from the sun. But it was life. She drank until he put a hand out. "A little," he said. "No more, for now." She handed it back, her hand shaking. As she stood, she looked at him, really looked at him in the unforgiving sunlight. He was not like anyone she had ever seen. His skin was dark, his hair long and black, tied back with a leather thong, but his features were a sharp, unsettling mix, and those eyes, they were the eyes of a white man. "Who are you?" she asked, the words spilling out. He corked the canteen, his gaze sweeping the horizon. "It does not matter." "It matters to me," she insisted, a flicker of her old spirit returning. "You killed a man. You pulled me from there. I need to know." He looked at her. His face was hard, but not cruel. It was the face of a man who had seen too much and expected nothing. "My name is Elias." "Did my cousin, Mr. Abernathy, did he send you?" "He did." "But how did you find me? How do you—" She trailed off, gesturing to the empty, hostile land around them. "How do you do this? What are you—" The question hung in the air. He knew what she was asking. It was the same question he had been asked his entire life. He turned and started walking again. "I was raised around here," he said, his voice flat, final. "I know how to vanish." Clara watched him go, then hurried to follow. He knew how to vanish. She realized that was what they were doing. They were not just running, they were disappearing. She began to watch him, not with fear, but with a student's desperate intensity. She saw how he would stop, tilting his head, listening to something she could not hear, a shift in the wind, the cry of a distant hawk. She saw him crumble a handful of dust, feeling its texture, its dryness. He was reading a language written in stone and sunlight. He tasted the air. He smelled the wind. He was tracking, she realized, but he was tracking the men who might be tracking them. As Elias walked, her question echoed in his mind. "What are you?" He blinked, and for a moment the high sun-bleached cliffs dissolved. He was 8 years old, standing outside the stockade of his father's trading post. The other children, white children with pale hair and freckles, circled him. "Injun," one of them spat. "Dirty half-breed." "My PA says your ma's a savage," said another. "That makes you a savage." He had stood there, his fists clenched, waiting. He looked for his father, Silas Kane, a man with a booming laugh and eyes just like his own. He saw him. His father was standing on the porch of the post, talking to a trapper. He saw the boys. He saw his son, and he turned away, pretending not to notice. The shame of that moment had been a physical burn, hotter than the sun. It was not shame for what he was. It was the shame of being disowned, of being nothing. That night, his father had left. Not a fight, not a dramatic exit. He just rode east, back to a wife and another family in Missouri. Elias's mother later learned he left them, his Apache wife and his pale-eyed son, as easily as he'd leave a worn-out pair of boots. The memory dissolved, replaced by another. His mother, Nasha, her face a mask of iron grief, taking him back to her people. The end day, they rode for weeks. But the world he found there was no kinder. His mother was an outcast, the woman who had lain with a white eye, the man who had abandoned her, and Elias. Elias was his father's son, the other boys, their skin a perfect, uniform copper, called him Indalitsosi, the pale one, the ghost. He had fought them, his small fists bloody, until he learned a better way. He learned to be quiet. He learned to be still. He learned to watch. His mother, seeing he would have no place among the warriors, taught him the other world. She taught him the land. "This does not judge you," she told him, her hand on the warm sandstone. "The earth does not care for the color of your eyes. It only asks that you listen." So he listened. He learned the names of the plants that healed and the plants that poisoned. He learned the sound a snake makes before it strikes, the way the air cools just before the rain, the difference between the track of a starved deer and a healthy one. The land became his language. It was the only place he was not a half-breed, not a ghost, but simply Elias. He blinked, the memory fading. The hot sun of the present snapped back into focus. He glanced over his shoulder. Clara was still behind him, her face pale with exhaustion, her torn dress catching on the thorns. She was struggling, but she was quiet, and she was keeping up. He saw the look in her eyes, the look of a person who no longer belonged to the world she came from. She was an outcast now, too. He felt a strange, unwelcome pull of recognition. On the third day, she stumbled, a small rock skittering down the embankment, making a sharp clatter in the silence. Elias spun, the sound of his knife leaving its sheath a metallic whisper. In one fluid motion, he had his arm around her, pulling her back against his chest, his other hand, the one with the blade, up and ready. He pressed her into the shadow of a boulder, his body a shield in front of hers. Clara's heart stopped. She was pressed so tightly against him she could feel the hard muscle of his back, the tension in his arm. He was absolutely still, his head cocked, listening. The silence of the canyon was absolute. Nothing moved. No birds, no insects. He held them there for a full minute. Clara could barely breathe. He was so close. She could smell the scent of him, dust, cured leather, and the faint, sharp tang of his own sweat. It was not an unpleasant smell. It was the smell of the earth itself. Finally, he relaxed, but not by much. He let go of her, stepping away, and sheathed his knife. He did not scold her for the noise. He just looked down at her feet. Her boots were falling apart. The sole of her left one was flapping, and blood was seaming through the torn leather. He said nothing. He swung his pack from his shoulder, unrolled his blanket, and with his knife, he cut 2 long strips from the edge. He knelt, took her foot in his hand, his touch rough, impersonal, and wrapped the wool strip tightly around the boot, binding the sole back in place. He did the same for the other. Clara stared at the top of his head, at his long, dark hair. Her fear of him, the sharp, animal terror, was gone. It had been replaced by a deep, weary awe. He was not just a rescuer. He was a protector. He had shielded her with his own body and mended her shoes with his own blanket. He stood up. "We are close," he said. He led her for another hour, into a narrow, overgrown canyon she would never have seen. The walls were choked with mesquite and ancient, thorny bushes. He pushed aside a curtain of dry vines, and there it was, a ruin. It was an old Spanish mission, its adobe walls crumbling back into the earth they came from. A bell tower, half fallen, listed against the impossible blue sky. The courtyard was a tangle of wild grasses. It was peaceful, it was hidden, it was safe. "We rest here," he said. He led her into the cool, dark interior of the main chapel. The roof was mostly gone, but the sacristy, a small room off to the side, was intact. He dropped his pack. "Sit," she obeyed, slumping against the cold adobe wall. He went to the far side of the room, to a place that looked like a collapsed altar. He slid a heavy, flat stone aside, revealing a dark hole. From it, he pulled a canvas sack. His supplies, he had stashed them here. He pulled out a small tin of salve, a clean strip of linen, and his canteen. He sat on his heels in front of her. "Your hands," he ordered. Clara hesitantly held out her wrists. They were a mess. The rawhide burns were swollen, oozing, and black with dirt. His touch was not gentle, but it was steady. He poured water over the wounds, washing away the grit. Clara hissed, the pain lancing up her arms, But she did not pull away. He took the linen and scrubbed the wounds clean. Then, with his finger, he spread the cool, sharp-smelling salve over the raw skin. She watched his face as he worked. His expression was focused, his pale eyes narrowed. He was treating her like a damaged tool, or a lamed horse, but he was treating her. When he was done, he wrapped her wrists loosely with the clean linen. He gave her jerky, a hard biscuit, and more water. They built a small, smokeless fire, and he boiled coffee. The smell filled the small room, rich and dark. It was the safety, the water, the first true kindness that broke her. She looked down at her bandaged wrists. She looked at her torn, filthy calico dress, stained with God knew what. She touched her matted hair, full of twigs and dirt. The grief that had washed out of her in the cave was for her family. This was for her. She began to cry, not the loud, racking sobs of before, but a deep, hopeless, silent weeping that shook her entire body. She was ruined. She had been property. She had been tied like an animal. The memory of the rawhide, the smell of the camp, the flat eyes of the warriors, it all came rushing back. "Look at me," she whispered, her voice thick with self-disgust. "Just look at me. I am nothing. I am so dirty." Elias sat across the fire, feeding small sticks into it. He did not look away. He did not tell her she was wrong. He just sat, and he listened. He let her empty herself of the shame. He was a witness. "My mother," Clara finally choked out, staring at the crumbling wall. She always said God has a plan, that he never gives us more than we can bear." She laughed, a short, bitter sound. "What plan is this? What am I supposed to do now?" She looked at him, her eyes desperate, begging for an answer he could not possibly have. "They killed them. They took everything. I do not know how to live anymore." Elias looked at the fire, at the small, steady flame. He thought of his mother, dying of a white man's lung fever. He thought of his father, vanishing to the east. He thought of all the years he had spent alone, surviving in the cracks between two worlds. He looked back at her. His voice was low, rough. "You already are." The words, simple and hard as stone, cut through her despair. You already are. It was not a promise. It was a fact. She was breathing. She was drinking his coffee. She was living. The storm hit just after dark. It came on suddenly, the wind rising from a moan to a shriek, howling through the broken bell tower. A low rumble of thunder gathered in the distance, growing closer until it sounded like the mountains themselves were tearing apart. A crack of lightning lit the sky, followed a second later by a boom that shook the adobe walls. Clara screamed. She scrambled into the corner, pulling her knees to her chest, her hands over her ears. It was not a storm. It was the attack. It was the sound of the rifles, the heavy, booming crack, crack, crack that had stolen her world. "No, no, no, please, no!" she whimpered, rocking back and forth. Elias saw the terror in her eyes. The fire spattered as rain began to leak through the old ceiling. He grabbed her arm. "This way! It is safer." He pulled her to her feet and half dragged her to a wooden trapdoor in the floor she had not seen. He heaved it open, revealing a set of stone steps leading down into blackness. "Get in," he said. It was a cellar, old and small, smelling of damp earth and dust. He pulled her down the steps and shut the heavy door, plunging them into absolute darkness. Above them, the storm raged. The cellar was not quiet, but the sound was different, muffled, subterranean. The earth itself seemed to groan with each crash of thunder. Clara was trembling so violently she could barely stand. She was back at the wagon, hiding behind the barrel, the world exploding. "It is just the sky," Elias said, his voice close in the dark. Another crash, louder this time, as if the lightning had struck the mission itself. The ground shook. Clara cried out and lunged forward, colliding with him. clutching the front of his shirt. She buried her face against his chest, her fingers twisting in the fabric. "Make it stop," she sobbed. "Please make it stop." Elias froze. His entire body went rigid. He was not used to being touched. He was not used to holding anyone. His first instinct was to push her away. But her trembling was a living thing, a panicked bird trapped in her ribs. He could feel her heart hammering against his. Slowly, awkwardly, he put one hand on her back. It was meant to be a steadying gesture, nothing more. "It is just thunder, Clara. It will pass." His voice, his stillness, the solid wall of his chest. It was the only anchor in the swirling, violent darkness. She felt his heartbeat under her cheek. It was slow, steady, strong. He was not afraid. She held on tighter, her sobs quieting. He smelled of smoke and the damp earth of the cellar. He was real. She lifted her head. She could not see his face, only a bare outline in the profound blackness. He was breathing slowly. She was breathing his air. It was not a thought. It was an impulse, born of grief, terror, and a desperate, aching need to feel something, anything other than fear, a need to connect to the one solid thing in her universe. She rose on her toes and kissed him. It was a clumsy, desperate kiss. Her lips pressed against his. It was full of the salt of her tears, the dust of the trail, the grief of her lost life. It was uncertain. It ached. It was a plea. Elias did not respond. He did not kiss her back, but for one long, suspended second, he did not pull away. He simply received it. He felt the trembling of her lips, the desperate, fragile hope in the gesture. Then, gently, he put his hands on her shoulders and pushed her back. He did not release her. He just created a few inches of space between them. In the dark, he rested his forehead against hers. She could feel his breath. He was conflicted. He was her rescuer. She was his charge. She was a woman unraveling. And in that one brief kiss, he had felt her soul fire, the one the shaman had named, and it had touched his own. He sat back on his heels, pulling away, leaving her in the cold air. They sat in the dark, not touching. Above them, the storm began to pass, the thunder rolling eastward. The silence that returned was heavier than the darkness, charged with what had just happened and what could not. When the storm passed, the silence it left behind was heavier than the cellar's darkness. Clara had kissed him. Elias had pulled away. They climbed out of the damp earth into a world washed clean, the morning air sharp and cold. The unspoken hung between them, a fragile, awkward thing. Elias said nothing. He simply kicked dirt over the dead coals, shouldered his pack, and led her from the mission ruins. 2 horses were waiting in a thicket of mesquite a mile down the canyon. They were lean, tough-looking Mustangs. One a dun, the other a mottled bay. They wore no brands. "Where?" Clara started to ask. "They belonged to a man who did not need them anymore," Elias said, his voice flat. He had stolen them. She realized. Stolen them for her. He had been preparing this route, this escape, even before he found her. He helped her mount the dun. His touch was brief, impersonal. His hands on her waist for only a second, but her skin burned where he had held her. He swung up onto the bay, his rifle resting easy across his lap. "Stay behind me," he said. "Do not talk. Watch what the horse does. Trust its feet more than your own." They rode out of the overgrown canyon and into the vast, open, sun-seared country. It was a world of towering red rock, of deep, shadowed gorges, of endless, aching blue sky. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying. It was a land that did not care if you lived or died. They traveled for days, winding through a maze of canyons that all looked the same to Clara. Elias, she saw, was reading the land as if it were a book. He was following washes, crossing ridges, and never once did he pause to question his direction. The awkwardness of the cellar faded, replaced by the immediate, demanding reality of survival. The silence became their habit. On the third day, he reined in his horse by a patch of scrubby brush. "We need meat," he said. He slid from the saddle, pulled his knife from the sheath on his hip, and handed it to her, hilt first. Clara stared at it. It was the same knife that had cut her bonds, the same knife that had ended the guard's life. It was heavy, the wooden handle worn smooth, the blade dark and sharp. "I cannot," she whispered, looking at her bandaged wrists. "You will," he said. He was not unkind, just absolute. "You do not know how to shoot. You cannot run. You will learn to feed yourself." He dismounted, walked her to the brush, and knelt. He pointed, not at the bush, but at the dust beneath it. "See here." Clara knelt beside him. She saw nothing but dirt. "Look," he insisted. He traced a finger along a faint, thread-like line in the dust. "A rabbit trail. He comes this way every morning, every night. He is small, but he is food." He spent an hour teaching her. He showed her how to find a young, pliant branch, how to use a length of sinew from his pack to create a loop, how to set the snare so the animal's own flight would trap it. His hands were patient, precise. He made her do it, her clumsy, sore fingers fumbling with the knot. "Again," he said when she failed. She tried again. He corrected her grip. "Tighter. The loop must be clean." He taught her other things. He showed her which plants had roots that held water. He taught her how to dig a small pit, line it with rocks, and build a fire to boil water without a pot, dropping the hot stones into the canteen cup. He taught her how to hold the knife, not for fighting, but for work, how to angle it to cut wood, how to skin the rabbit she finally caught. She cried when she saw the small, limp body in the snare. She had not expected to. "You will thank it for its life," Elias said, his voice quiet. "Then you will skin it, or we do not eat." He turned his back, giving her the privacy to do the work, or to fail. She did not fail. Her hands shook, and she felt sick, but she did it. She was learning his language, the language of the earth. He was teaching her to be like him, to survive, and as he taught her, the fear she held for him slowly, day by day, began to transform. It became a deep, grudging respect, and something more, a trust that felt more solid than the rock beneath her feet. She found herself watching him. She watched him as he rode, his back straight, his eyes constantly moving, scanning the ridges. She watched him at night, sitting just outside the small ring of firelight, his rifle across his knees, listening to the darkness. He rarely seemed to sleep. One afternoon, she caught him watching her. She had been rewrapping the linen on her wrists, which were finally beginning to heal. The skin a raw, angry pink. He was staring, his face unreadable, his pale eyes holding a strange, deep sorrow. When he saw her looking, he immediately turned away, his expression hardening, as if she had caught him in a moment of weakness. The danger, when it came, was as sudden as the storm. They were moving through a narrow pass, the canyon walls rising high on either side. Elias suddenly reined in, his head lifting, his whole body going rigid. He was listening to the wind. Clara stopped behind him, her heart leaping into her throat. "What is it?" she whispered. "Get off the horse," he said, his voice low and urgent. He was already dismounting, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. "Take your knife. Hide. In those rocks. Now. Clara!" She scrambled from the dun, her legs trembling, and ran to a jumble of sandstone boulders, crouching behind the largest one. A moment later, a rider appeared at the far end of the pass. He was a white man, big, with a thick beard and a dirty duster. He rode a heavy-shouldered roan, a shotgun resting across his saddle. He stopped when he saw Elias standing alone in the trail, holding the reins of the two horses. "Well now," the man called out. his voice a gravelly boom that echoed off the walls. "What we got here? A breed with 2 horses? You find them, boy." Elias did not move. He stood, his rifle held loosely at his side, pointed at the ground. "Keep riding." "I do not think so," the man said. He squinted, his eyes moving past Elias, scanning the area. "I am looking for something. A girl, white girl, taken by the Jicarilla. Seen her?" "No," Elias said. The man smiled, a slow, unpleasant spreading of his lips. He had seen Clara's horse, the dun, a mare, still breathing hard from their travel. He saw the tracks of her smaller boots in the dust. "You are a liar, boy," the man said. He lifted his shotgun slightly. "I am working for a Mr. Abernathy, out of Santa Fe. Got a handbill right here, $500 for the girl." "She is not here," Elias said, his voice still flat, cold. "Oh, she is," the man said, his gaze fixed on the rocks where Clara was hiding. "She is right. There." He swung the shotgun up, not at Elias, but at the boulders. "Come on out, girl. I'm here to rescue you." "No!" Clara screamed, her voice thin. The man laughed. $500. And Mr. Abernathy, he told me to get her back. At any cost. That means, if this Injun here gave you trouble, well, I would be a hero for putting him down." He looked at Elias. "You understand me? I get the girl, I get the gold, and I get to kill me a horse thief. It is a good day." "Let her go," Elias said. "You take the horses, you ride away." "You are not in a spot to bargain," the man said. He cocked the shotgun. The click-clack was deafening. "Now, you drop that rifle, boy, real slow, or I'm gonna blow her head right off those rocks." Clara watched. Her heart stopped. She saw Elias's hand on the rifle. He could not shoot. The man's shotgun was aimed at her. He could not drop it. The man would kill him instantly. Elias slowly, very slowly, began to lower his rifle. His eyes locked on the bounty hunter. "That is right," the man grinned, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Easy." The world exploded. Elias did not drop the rifle. In a movement so fast, Clara could not follow it. He dropped to one knee, bringing the rifle up, not to his shoulder, but to his hip. He fired. The shot was a single, deafening crash. The bounty hunter screamed, a high, thin sound, as the bullet tore through his shoulder, his blast from the shotgun exploding harmlessly into the cliff face high above Clara's head. The man fell from his horse, landing hard in the dust, his shotgun skittering away. He was not dead. He was clutching his shoulder, roaring in pain, fumbling for the revolver at his hip. Elias did not fire again. He dropped the rifle and moved. He covered the 20 yards between them in a blur, his knife appearing in his hand as if by magic. Clara stood up, her hand over her mouth. "Elias, do not—" The bounty hunter got his pistol free. He raised it, his hand shaking, blood pouring between his fingers. Elias was on him. He did not slow. He kicked the gun from the man's hand. The man lunged, trying to grab him. It was not a fight. It was an execution. It was brutal, fast, and terrible. Elias's arm moved once, twice, a deep, wet sound. The bounty hunter's eyes went wide, a look of shocked surprise on his face. He made a gurgling sound and went limp. Elias stayed there, kneeling over the body for a long second, his head bowed, his chest heaving. The silence that rushed back into the past was profound, broken only by the sound of Elias's harsh breathing and the nervous stamping of the horses. Clara felt the bile rise in her throat. She stumbled from the rocks and was sick. When she finished, she looked up. Elias had not moved. He was just kneeling. Finally, he stood. He walked to the man's horse, caught its reins, and tied it. Then he picked up the man's shotgun and rifle. He methodically emptied them, throwing the cartridges into the dust. He took the man's canteen and his saddlebags. He walked to Clara. He did not look at her. He just handed her the man's canteen. "Drink." Then he went back to the body, grabbed it by the boots, and began to drag it off the trail into a shallow ravine. Clara watched, frozen. This was the man who had mended her boots, the man who had gently salved her wrists, and he was capable of this final, awful violence. She was not afraid of him. She was shaken to her very core. "Get the shovel," he said. His voice was not his own. It was a dead, hollow thing. She found it tied to the bounty hunter's saddle, a small, folding spade. They buried him. They did not speak. For an hour, they took turns, digging into the hard, rocky soil. The sun beat down. The only sounds were the scrape-thunk of the spade and the buzzing of flies. When the hole was deep enough, Elias rolled the body in. They filled it. He piled heavy stones on top, not as a marker, but to keep the animals away. When it was done, Elias stood, covered in sweat and dirt. He did not look at Clara. He walked away, up onto a small rise, and sat, his back to her, staring out at the empty canyon. He did not speak for the rest of the day. They made camp that night in a high defensible cove. Elias sat apart, cleaning his knife with a piece of leather. Over and over, he cleaned his rifle. He reloaded the spent cartridge. He did not eat. Clara watched him. The silence was different. Now, it was not the comfortable silence of the trail. It was a dark, heavy thing, full of the blood he had spilled. She finally understood. She saw the pain he carried. It was not just his past, his shame at being a half-breed. It was the killing. He knew how to vanish. He had said he knew how to survive, and this was the price. She saw the profound, crushing loneliness in him. He was a man who lived outside all worlds, who had to become a ghost, a killer, to protect the small part of him that was still human. He was ashamed. Not of the killing, perhaps, but of the necessity of it. Ashamed that this was what the world had made him. The next day, they found a river. It was a thin green ribbon of cottonwoods and willow, winding through the red desert. The sound of moving water was a blessing. They made camp in the trees. Elias took his rifle and left. "I will scout," he said. It was the first time he had spoken in almost a day. Clara knew he was not just scouting. He was walking off the ghost of the man he had killed. While he was gone, she went to the riverbank. She could not bear the grime, the sweat, the smell of sickness and death that clung to her. She waded into the shallows, the water shocking and cold against her ankles. She untied the linen from her wrists. The skin was pink and new. She dunked her head under the water, scrubbing at her scalp, her matted hair. She washed her face, her arms, her neck, splashing the cold, clean water over her skin. It was a baptism. It was a reclamation. She was washing away the filth of the camp, the dust of the trail, the blood of the pass. She did not realize she was humming. It was a small, tuneless sound, a melody her mother used to hum while hanging laundry. It was the sound of being alive, of being clean. Elias stood in the trees, watching. For how long? She did not know. When she turned, toweling her hair with her skirt, she saw him. He was 20 yards away, his back to her. He was giving her the respect he had been denied his whole life. He had heard her humming, and he had turned away, giving her the privacy of her song, of her cleansing. He stood like a statue, guarding her, listening. She walked from the river, her hair dripping, her heart aching with a strange, new feeling. She sat by the fire, combing her fingers through her wet hair. He came and sat across from her, his face still grim, but the hollowness was gone from his eyes. He had returned. She had to ask. She had to know if the grime was only on her skin, or if it went deeper. "Elias?" she said, her voice quiet. He looked at her, his pale eyes catching the firelight. When you found me in that camp, she had to force the words out. After what they did, after what I was... She looked down at her hands. Do I disgust you? The question was a stone dropped into the silence. Elias looked at her. He saw her, really saw her. Her face scrubbed clean, her hair dark with water, her eyes wide and honest, her new pink skin shining on her wrists. He saw the shaman's captive soul fire. He reached out, slowly, and put one finger under her chin, lifting her face. His touch was rough, calloused, but it was not violent. It was not clinical. It was present. You are not broken, he said, his voice a low rumble. You are brave. He let her go. He had answered. He had reframed her world. She was not something dirty. She was something strong. That night, the air between them was different. The shared violence, the silent burial, the cleansing in the river, and now, this. The walls he kept around himself had cracks in them. The shame she carried had been named and dismissed. He laid his bedroll on one side of the fire. She laid hers on the other. But the few feet of space between them felt charged, alive. She lay awake, watching the flames. He lay on his back, staring up at the stars through the cottonwood leaves. Elias? She whispered again. I am here. She sat up. She looked at him. He turned his head, his pale eyes watching her in the dark. Slowly, she stood, took her bedroll, and walked around the fire. She did not ask. She just unrolled it beside his. He did not move. He did not speak. He just watched her. She lay down, her back to him, her heart hammering. She was terrified. Not of him, of herself, of what she was asking. She felt him shift, the rustle of his blanket, then the solid, warm weight of his body pressing against her back. He did not put his arms around her. He just lay beside her, a solid living wall. She let out a breath she had been holding for weeks. She turned, slowly, to face him. They looked at each other in the dim, flickering light. He saw her fear and her strength. She saw his loneliness and his terrible, quiet kindness. He lifted a hand and touched her hair. Clara, he whispered, as if testing her name. She leaned into his hand. They made love. It was not the desperate, grieving kiss in the cellar. It was slow. It was quiet. It was almost hesitant. It was a discovery. It was his calloused, rough hands, so capable of violence, being impossibly tender. It was her body, which she had thought was ruined. A prison, waking up, feeling again. It was the first time her skin had been touched without pain, without fear, since her mother had pulled her from the wagon. It was not passion. It was comfort. It was two broken, outcast souls finding a moment of peace, a moment of profound, simple, human warmth in a world that had offered them none. It was the first time Clara felt her body was truly, completely her own again. Afterward, she lay curled against his chest, her head tucked under his chin, his arm heavy and secure around her. And she cried. She cried for the woman she had been, who was gone forever. She cried for the woman she was becoming. She cried for the sheer, impossible relief of being alive and of being touched with kindness. Elias held her. He said nothing. He did not ask her why she was crying. He did not need to. He just held her, his hand stroking her damp hair, his own eyes closed, his face pressed against the top of her head. He just held her as the fire burned down to embers, and the river whispered to them in the darkness. The wilderness ended at a muddy street. They had traded the bounty hunter's horse and their 2 Mustangs at a remote Navajo trading post for 2 unremarkable geldings and supplies. Elias had been silent during the transaction, his face set in the impassive mask he wore for the world. For 5 days they had ridden east, back toward the edges of the civilization that had spat Elias out and had failed to protect Clara. The intimacy they had found by the river, The quiet language of their bodies and the shared grief had retreated. It was a fragile, new thing, like a healed wound, and the approach of the town made it pull tight. They were returning to his, and to her, past. The border town was a raw scar of new-cut lumber and old adobe. Crouched low against the vast, empty plains, it smelled of coal smoke, manure, and frying fat. After weeks of silence, the noise was a physical assault. The clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the sharp rattle of a wagon on the hard-packed street, the tinny disaster of a piano playing badly from a saloon. Elias rode a few feet ahead, his back straight, his rifle in its scabbard. Clara followed, her hair combed, her dress washed but still torn, her mended boots thick with dust. People stopped to look. At first, Clara thought they were staring at her. She was a woman in rags, riding in from the wild, a survivor. She saw women on the boardwalk stop their chatter, their hands flying to their mouths. Then she heard the word. It was a whisper, passed from a shopkeeper to a customer. Half-breed. Another man, leaning against a post, spat a stream of tobacco juice into the street. Look at that. Got himself a white woman. Wonder what he paid for her. Clara's blood ran cold. She looked at Elias. His face had changed. The man who had gently stroked her hair, who had looked at her with such pained honesty, was gone. In his place was the tracker, the killer. His pale eyes were flat, dead, sweeping the street, noting every man, every shadow. He was a weapon, tensed and waiting. She saw the women pulling their children closer. She saw the men in front of the saloon, their expressions a mix of curiosity and a low, simmering hatred. It was then she understood. In the wilderness, she had been the captive. Here, he was not safe. The land of canyons and rocks, the land that had tried to kill her, had been their sanctuary. This town, her world, was his prison. The prejudice was a palpable thing, thick as the coal smoke, and it followed him like a shadow he could not outrun. He had saved her life, and these people, her people, would hang him for it. "Where is your cousin?" Elias asked, his voice low, pitched only for her. "The hotel," she said, her own voice trembling. "The Abernathy Hotel. He wrote, his family built it." It was the largest building on the street, 2 stories of false-fronted bravado. They dismounted, Elias's hand never straying far from the revolver at his hip. Clara felt a new shame, a shame for this world, for these people. A man in a black suit was standing on the boardwalk, pacing anxiously. He was thin, with a trimmed beard and the pale skin of an Easterner. He was looking up the street, expectant. "Arthur!" Clara called. His head snapped around. His eyes, the same blue as her mother's, went wide. He froze, as if seeing a ghost. "Clara," he whispered. He stumbled down the steps, his hands outstretched. "Clara, my God, it is you!" He grabbed her, pulling her into a desperate, clumsy hug. He was crying, real tears of relief wetting her shoulder. I had given up. The soldiers said there was no hope." "Oh, my dear girl, you are alive. You are alive." Clara clung to him, a sob of her own catching in her throat. This was family. This was the world she had lost. "Arthur," she wept. I thought I would never." Then Arthur saw Elias. He was standing back by the horses, his face impassive, his presence a silent challenge. He held the reins, watching. Arthur's embrace on Clara loosened. He stiffened, his relief curdling instantly into suspicion, his eyes narrowing. He looked from the tall, mixed-blood man to Clara's torn dress, to her matted hair, to the raw, pink scars on her wrists. His Eastern mind, full of parlor-room stories of savage lands, leaped to a conclusion. "Clara," he said, his voice dropping to a low, urgent command. He pulled her behind him, shielding her, as if Elias were about to attack. "Get inside the hotel, now!"
"Arthur, no,"
Clara protested.
"this is Elias. He is the one. He saved me."
"We will discuss it inside," Arthur said, his voice hard. He looked at Elias, his gaze filled with disgust and authority. "You, tracker, wait here. I will settle your account." He was speaking to Elias as one would speak to a dog or a piece of equipment. Elias just nodded once, his eyes empty. He did not look at Clara. He turned his attention back to the street, a silent guard. Arthur bustled Clara through the hotel doors, into a lobby of dark wood, red velvet, and the smell of polish and stale cigars. It was suffocating. He rushed her up the stairs, into a room. It was beautiful, a soft bed with a white quilt, wallpaper with small, printed flowers, a porcelain pitcher and a bowl for washing. It was the world she had dreamed of for weeks. It felt like a cage.
"Are you hurt?"
Arthur demanded, closing the door. He was pacing, his hands twisting. "Clara, you must tell me. Did those savages, did they harm you?"
I am alive,"
she stammered, overwhelmed by the sudden shift, by the softness of the rug under her feet. "And him," Arthur said, stabbing a finger toward the window, which overlooked the street. "That man, he brought you here. What did he demand? What did he do to you?"
"He saved me,"
Clara insisted, her voice rising.
"He tracked me. He got me out. Arthur, he is the only reason I am here."
"Found you?" Arthur scoffed, his face flushing with a strange, proprietary anger. "Clara, you must be sensible. You have been through a terrible trauma. A decent woman, a girl of your standing, does not simply arrive, in rags, with a man like that. What am I to tell people? What the hell have you done?" The word struck her like a slap. He was not angry at her captors. He was not angry at the bounty hunter who had tried to kill her. He was angry at her. He was furious that she had survived in a way that was inconvenient, in a way that brought shame to his hotel, to his name.
"I have done nothing but survive,"
she said, her voice growing cold, the captive soul fire that Elias had respected. Arthur found offensive. "You will rest," Arthur commanded, his face tight. "You will not leave this room. I will have a doctor sent up, and a bath, and he said, moving to the door. "I will handle him." He left, locking the door from the outside. Clara stood in the center of the beautiful, civilized room, shaking with a new kind of rage. She was a prisoner again. She waited. The bath came, brought by a wary-looking maid who would not meet her eyes. The doctor came, a fussy, old man who clucked his tongue over her wrists and her thinness and asked her veiled, insulting questions. "You are a very lucky girl, Miss Shaw," he said. "That your ordeal did not result in a more permanent condition. Your cousin has assured me you will have the best of care." When he left, she was alone again. The sun began to set. The room grew dark. She could not rest. The soft bed felt like quicksand. The silence of the room felt louder than the thunderstorm in the cellar. She felt the old panic rising, the feeling of being tied, of being trapped. She crept to the door. He had locked it. She went to the window. It overlooked the main street, now cast in the sickly yellow-orange glow of new gas lights. She saw Arthur, her cousin, standing on the boardwalk below. He was talking to a man with a silver star on his vest, the town sheriff. Clara pressed her ear to the cool glass, but she could not hear. She tried to lift the window sash. It was stuck. In a flash of fury, she gripped the handle and shoved. The old wood cracked, and the window shot open with a loud thump. The cold night air hit her face, and the voices, clear now, rose from below. Hysterical. "Sheriff," Arthur was saying, his voice smooth and reasonable. "The trauma. You understand. She is not making sense. This tracker. He clearly took advantage of the situation. So, what are you saying, Mr. Abernathy? The sheriff's voice was a low drawl. You saying he… what? He took her from the tribe himself? You saying he kidnapped her? Clara's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. It is the only thing that makes sense, Arthur said, sighing, as if the conclusion pained him. He wants the reward. Surely, $500 is a fortune to a man like that. He probably threatened her, told her to say he rescued her. She is terrified of him. We must run him out. For her own safety. It is the only decent thing to do. Well, we do not want his kind stirring up trouble here. The sheriff agreed. I will get a few boys. We will tell him to move on. If he gives us any trouble. The sheriff let the threat hang in the air. Clara backed away from the window. The lie was breathtaking. Arthur was not just protecting his reputation, he was protecting his reward money. He had painted Elias as the villain, the savage, and he was using the town's blind prejudice as his weapon. They would run him out, or worse, they would kill him, and Arthur would be the grieving cousin who had tried to save his lost, ruined relative. She looked at the locked door. She looked at the torn, clean dress the maid had left for her. She ripped a sheet from the bed, tore a long strip, and tied it to the bedpost. She did not know how to live anymore. Elias had told her she already was, and he was right. She walked to the door and pounded on it with both fists. Arthur, let me out! Let me out of here! She heard footsteps running up the stairs, the key rattling in the lock. Arthur threw the door open, his face a mask of false concern. Clara, my dear, what is it? Did the doctor… She pushed past him, into the hallway, her bare feet silent on the carpet runner. Clara, where are you going? You are not decent. She did not stop. She went down the main staircase, her steps quick and sure. Arthur and the sheriff were in the lobby, their heads together, frozen in mid-conspiracy. Several men from the saloon, drawn by the talk, lingered by the door. Arthur, Clara said. Her voice was not loud. It was low, cold, and it cut through the murmuring of the room. Every man turned to look at her, the girl from the wilderness, her hair damp and wild, her feet bare, her eyes burning with the captive soul fire. Clara, my dear, Arthur said, forcing a smile, stepping toward her. You should be resting. You are not well. You are lying, she said. The room went silent. Now, Clara, Arthur said, his smile twitching. You are overwrought. You do not know what you are saying. I am perfectly well, she said, walking toward him, stopping just a few feet away. She looked at the sheriff. And I will not have him lie. I will not have you lie. Miss Shaw, the sheriff said, removing his hat. Your cousin is just trying to protect you. He is protecting his money, Clara said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. That man, Elias, is the only reason I'm alive. He tracked me for 2 weeks. He killed a guard who was about to harm me. He cut me free. A murmur went through the men at the door. He killed a bounty hunter you hired, Arthur, she continued, her gaze locking on her cousin. A man named Silas, who was going to kill me and say the tribe did it, just to collect your gold. The sheriff's eyes widened. That was a serious charge. He protected me, Clara said, her voice breaking, but she did not stop. He fed me from his own pack. He taught me how to survive. He wrapped my wrists. He is a better man, a more civilized man, than anyone in this room, and you. She looked at Arthur. You are ashamed. You are ashamed of me, because I did not die neatly. Arthur's face was white. This was a disaster, a public humiliation. You are ruined, he whispered, his voice venomous. No, Clara said, lifting her chin. I am not. I was a captive, and now I am free. But you, cousin,
You are a coward, and you are a liar.
She turned, leaving him standing there, his mouth open. She pushed through the saloon men, who parted for her as if she were a flame. She walked out of the bright lobby, onto the dark, cold street. She knew where to find him. He was not at the livery. He was not on the main street. He was at the edge of town, where the last, sputtering gaslight marked the end of the boardwalk and the beginning of the infinite, dark plains. He had his rifle. He had his saddlebag. He was just standing there, a shadow against the darkness, looking out at the only home he had.
Elias?
She said, her voice soft. He turned. His face, in the faint yellow light, was a mask of profound, weary sadness. The hard mask was gone. This was the man who had held her by the river.
You should not be out here. Clara, it is not safe.
They were going to run you out.
She said, my cousin, he lied. He told the sheriff you kidnapped me.
Elias looked down, a short, bitter huff of a laugh escaping him.
He is not the first.
He looked back up at her. It does not matter. I am leaving.
But I told them.
She insisted, stepping closer. I told them the truth. They know. The truth does not matter in there, he said, nodding toward the hotel. That is their world. This, he gestured to the dark, is mine. That place does not want me, Clara. He was resigning. He was delivering her to her people, to the world she belonged to, and he was vanishing back into his own. He was protecting her, even now, from the choice of him. You are safe now, he said, his voice rough. Your cousin will care for you. He has money. You will be... No. He stopped. He will not, she said. She looked back at the hotel, the bright square of light, full of whispers and lies. Then she looked at him, the man who had called her brave. That is not my home, not anymore. Elias stared at her, his pale eyes searching her face in the gloom.
Clara, you have nowhere else to go. Your family is gone.
You are wrong. She took the last step, closing the space between them. She was in the mud of the street. He was on the dirt. She stood directly in front of him.
I do have somewhere to go.
She looked up at him, her heart hammering so hard it felt like it would break her ribs. Then take me with you. His breath hitched. He understood. He understood what she was giving up. Her name, her inheritance, her whiteness, the entire world that had defined her.
Clara,
he whispered, and his voice was raw, breaking. You do not know what you are asking. The life I have, it is not a life. It is rocks and silence. It is hiding. It is running. It is real, she said, her voice fierce. And it is where you are. I do not care about the rest. He saw it then, blazing in her eyes. The fire, the strength. She was not the girl from the wagon, trembling behind a barrel. She was a woman who had walked through hell and had chosen her own path out. He reached out, his hand shaking, his gloveless fingers calloused and warm. He touched her face, his thumb brushing the line of her jaw. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing, and rose on her toes. She kissed him. He kissed her back. It was not the desperate, grieving kiss of the cellar. It was not the slow, healing discovery by the river. This was a kiss of defiance. It was a vow. It was an anchor, dropped in the muddy street under a single, flickering gaslight. They were both trembling, not from the cold, not from fear, but from the terrifying, exhilarating, irreversible weight of the choice they had just made. They were two outcasts, two survivors, and they had just chosen each other over the entire world. The kiss under the gaslight was a seal. When they broke apart, the yellow light catching the sudden, sharp clarity in both their eyes, the world had shifted. The muddy street, the jeering town, the dark plain, it was all the same, but they were not. You will need a coat, Elias said. His voice was practical, but the roughness in it, The emotion he was holding back was plain. And good boots. Can you get them?
Yes,
Clara said. She looked back at the hotel, a bright rectangle of lies.
he owes me that much.
I will be at the livery. The 2 geldings we rode in on. I will buy supplies with what I have. Be fast. We leave before the sheriff finds his courage again. She nodded. I will not be long. She did not run back to the hotel. She walked. She walked past the men still lingering on the boardwalk, their faces a mixture of confusion and suspicion. She walked past the front desk, where the clerk stared at her bare feet. She walked up the stairs, her back straight. Her room was as she had left it, the door still open. Arthur was not there. He was likely in the saloon, drowning his humiliation in whiskey, plotting a new story to save his name. Clara moved with purpose. She did not look at the fine wallpaper or the soft bed. She went to the armoire. Inside were clothes Arthur had purchased for her, clothes she had not yet worn. A sensible wool traveling skirt, a warm coat, 2 flannel shirts, and on the floor, a pair of sturdy, leather walking boots, the kind a woman might wear for a long coach journey. She dressed quickly, her hands sure. The fit was good. The boots felt solid, real. She found paper, a pen, and an inkwell on a small desk by the window. She sat, dipped the pen, and began to write. She did not address it to dear cousin. She did not mince words. Arthur, I am leaving. You will not see me again, and you will not look for me. The men you tried to send after Elias, the man who saved my life, will not find us. You have made your choice, and now I am making mine. You were not concerned for my safety. You were concerned for your reputation. You were not grieving my family. You were grieving the inconvenience of my survival. You looked at me and saw a problem. You looked at Elias and saw a savage. You saw nothing true. The man you called a half-breed, the man you tried to have arrested or killed, showed me more honor and kindness than I have ever known from your civilized world. He did not harm me. He did not kidnap me. He protected me. He healed me. And he treated me as a human being when you and your doctor were only interested in whether I was ruined. Well, I am ruined. I am ruined for your world of polite lies and cold, backroom hatred. I am ruined for your drawing rooms and your whispers. I am glad to be. Do not use my name to justify your prejudice. Do not use my memory to spin your tales. I am alive, and I am free. I am choosing a life where a person is judged by their strength and their heart, not by the color of their skin or the name of their father. I am going with him. We will find a place where your kind of law, your kind of God, cannot reach us. The $500 you offered for my life, you should keep. It is the price of your soul. Clara Shaw. She did not blot the last word, but let the ink sit, black and final. She folded the letter, walked over to the pristine white bedspread, and left the paper in the very center, a dark stain on all that false purity. She took a small canvas bag, packed the extra shirt, a bar of soap, and walked out. She did not look back. Elias was waiting, just as he said. The 2 geldings stood in the shadow of the livery, loaded with far more than they had arrived with. He had worked fast. Sacks of flour, salt, coffee, beans, axes, a shovel head, rope, and a heavy roll of canvas. He had spent his payment from Arthur, the $50, and probably more. He helped her mount, his hands firm on her waist. He swung up onto his own horse. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," she said. They did not ride down the main street. They cut through the alley, behind the saloon, past the darkened blacksmith shop, and out onto the plain. The town vanished behind them, a small, angry glow in the vast darkness. They rode north, into the high country. They rode for weeks. The land changed. The flat, dry plains gave way to rolling hills, then to steep, rocky foothills. They climbed, the air growing thinner, cooler. They left the red rock of the south behind, entering a world of deep pine, white-barked aspen, and sharp granite peaks. Elias was lighter than she had ever seen him. With every mile that put the town behind them, a tension seemed to drain from his shoulders. He was back in his element, but this time, he was not alone. He was not vanishing. He was searching. Clara learned to ride like she had learned to walk in the desert. She learned to sit the horse, to save its strength, to read its ears. She learned the silence of the high mountains, a silence so deep it rang in her ears, broken only by the cry of an eagle or the rustle of their own passage. She felt her old self fall away. Piece by piece, the fear, the grief, the shame, they were still there, but they were scars, not open wounds. They were part of her, just as the healed pink skin on her wrists was part of her. "What are we looking for?" she asked him one evening, as they made camp by a rushing, snow-fed stream. Elias looked up from the fire. He had been staring into it, his face calm. "A place that can be defended," he said. "A place with water, timber, and game. A place high up. A place—" He hesitated. "A place where they will not look," she finished. "A place where they cannot," he said. "A place that does not want them." They found it 3 days later. It was a valley, a high mountain meadow cupped in a bowl of granite cliffs. It was high, at least 8,000 feet. The entrance was a narrow, steep-sided pass, barely wide enough for a wagon, choked with aspen and elder. The valley itself opened up, a mile long and half a mile wide, a stream, clear and cold, cut through the center, lined with willow. The slopes were thick with tall ponderosa pine. Good, straight timber. The meadow grass was high, and as they rode in, a small herd of elk lifted their heads, watched them, and then bounded gracefully into the trees. But it was cold. The wind that came down from the peaks still had the bite of winter, even in the late spring. The wildflowers were small, tough, alpine blooms, columbine, and paintbrush. "It will be a hard winter," Elias said, his eyes scanning the ridgeline. "But it is beautiful," Clara said, her voice full of awe. "It feels safe." "It is," he said. He pointed to the narrow pass. "One man could hold that pass against 20. The cliffs are too steep to climb. There is water, wood, and meat. This will be the place." They began to build their life with rough hands. They started with the canvas tent Elias had bought. It was not a teepee, but a simple wall tent, a shelter against the sudden, cold mountain storms. They set it up near the stream, under a stand of massive pines. This was their first home. Then the real work began. Elias taught her to use an axe, not the small one for firewood, but a full-sized felling axe. Her hands, soft from her old life, blistered within an hour. The blisters broke, and she kept working, her hands bleeding, until Elias took the axe from her. He did not coddle her. He simply took her hands, washed them in the stinging cold stream, and spread the last of his salve on them. "You will stop for today," he said. "Tomorrow, your hands will be harder." They were. She learned to swing the axe, to feel the bite of the blade, to hear the thunk as it bit deep. She found a rhythm. She found a strength in her arms and back she never knew she possessed. They worked as a team. He would notch the huge pines, and together, with a two-man saw, they would bring them down, the crash echoing through the silent valley. He hunted. He would leave at dawn, a ghost in the trees, and return by noon with a deer or a brace of rabbits. She learned to skin, to dress the meat, to smoke it in a small lean-to they built. Nothing was wasted. They cleared a patch of land near the stream, the richest soil. They turned it with the shovel, picking out the rocks. It was back-breaking work. They planted the small sack of beans, corn, and potatoes Elias had bought. It was late in the season, but he said, "The soil is strong. It will give us something." Clara found a joy in the simple, aching tiredness at the end of the day. She found joy in the smell of pine sawdust, in the splash of cold water on her face, in the taste of fresh meat roasted over their fire. She found joy in him. The silence that had once been a wall of fear or awkwardness was now a shared comfort. They could work for hours, just the sound of the saw, the axe, and their breathing. They would stop, drink from the stream, and he would look at her, a small, almost invisible smile touching the corners of his mouth. It was a look of such profound, quiet pride that it made her heart ache. And sometimes, in the evenings, the silence was broken by laughter. It was a sound she had not realized she missed. He had a dry, quiet sense of humor. One day, she was trying to lift a log, grunting, her face red. She slipped and fell backward into the mud of the creek bank. She sat there, stunned and covered in black, cold mud. She looked at him, expecting his flat, impassive stare. He was hiding his mouth with his hand, but his shoulders were shaking. A low, rusty sound came from his chest. He was laughing. Clara stared at him, and then she started to laugh, too, a full, open-throated laugh that echoed off the cliffs. He reached down, pulled her to her feet, his eyes shining with a light she had never seen before. Their cabin rose slowly, log by log. They peeled the bark, notched the ends with the axe, and, using ropes and sheer will, levered them into place. It was a small, simple square, but it was theirs. It was a fortress. And as they built, their own bond deepened, settling into a place more solid than the cabin's foundation. She would lie awake in the canvas tent, in their shared bedroll, watching the moonlight paint the canvas. He would be asleep, his breathing deep and even, one arm slung protectively over her waist. She would remember the journey. One night, weeks before, when they were still traveling, he had been humming, a low, repetitive chant, the sound he made when he was scouting. "What is that?" she had asked. He stopped, embarrassed. "A song from my mother's people. It is for walking." "Sing it," she urged. He had shaken his head, but she had touched his face. "Please." He sang it, his voice low and soft, a song about the earth and the sky. And when he was done, she had stood up, pulling him to his feet. "Dance with me." "I do not know how," he said, looking at her as if she were mad. Not like that." "Neither do I," she said. So they had danced. It was just a slow rocking, a shuffle in the dust by the fire, under a billion cold stars. She had her head on his chest, his arms were wrapped around her, and they moved as one. A quiet, two-person ritual that belonged only to them. She remembered another night. They were tracing the maps of each other's skin in the firelight. He had a long, white scar on his ribs. She touched it. "Who?" she asked. "A soldier, in a settlement," he said, his voice flat. "I was 17. I was buying flour. He did not like my answer, or my face." Clara's hand tightened. She leaned down and kissed the scar, a small, soft press of her lips against the ruined skin. He had tensed, then pulled her hand to his mouth. He looked at her wrists, the pink, healed skin. He kissed them, first the right, then the left, a gesture of such tenderness, such reverence, that it had undone her. It was his way of saying, "I see you. We are the same. We are both survivors." Now, in the valley, their life was hard, but it was whole. The shadows of the world below seemed, finally, to have receded, until the day they returned. The cabin walls were up, but the roof was only half finished. They were working. Elias on the low-pitched roof, Clara handing him split pine shingles, when their horse, grazing in the meadow, suddenly lifted its head and whinnied, staring at the pass. Elias was on the ground in a second, his rifle in his hand. "Inside," he said, "not to the cabin, but to the tent. Get the rifle. Stay there." Clara's heart seized. She scrambled for the second rifle, the one taken from the bounty hunter, She checked its load, her hands steady. Just as he had taught her, she knelt behind the stack of logs, her eyes on the pass. A minute later, a horse and rider appeared. It was not the sheriff. It was another man, wearing a town coat and a bowler hat, a badge pinned clumsily to his lapel. He was a deputy, or perhaps just a man hired by Arthur, given a false badge and a false purpose. He was alone. He rode slowly into the meadow, his eyes wide at the half-built cabin, the sign of their homestead. He looked nervous, his hand hovering near the pistol at his hip. "Hello, the camp," he called out, his voice thin in the vast silence. Elias stepped out from behind the cabin, his rifle held low, at his side. "Keep riding," he said. His voice was the one from the pass, the dead, cold one. The man flinched, startled. He pulled on his reins, stopping his horse. I am here on official business. I am looking for a man named Elias, and a woman, Clara Shaw." "She is not here," Elias said. "Now, listen," the man said, pulling a piece of folded paper from his pocket. "I got a warrant here, from Santa Fe, for the arrest of Elias, on the charge of kidnapping Miss Clara Shaw, her cousin, Mr. Arthur Abernathy. He signed the affidavit himself, says you took her against her will." The lie had followed them all the way here. "He is a liar," Elias said. "That is not for you to say," the man said, finding a bit of courage. He looked past Elias toward the tent. "Miss Shaw, are you in there? You are safe now. Come on out. I am here to take you home." It was the bounty hunter, all over again, the same words, the same self-righteous, blind certainty. Elias raised his rifle. "This is your last warning. This is not your land. Your paper is worth nothing here. Turn around." "I will not," the man said, his voice cracking. He pulled his revolver, clumsy and slow, pointing it at Elias. "You are under arrest, half-breed, in the name of the law." "No," a new voice said. The man's head snapped toward the tent. Clara stepped out. She was not the girl from the hotel lobby, barefoot and trembling. She was dressed in her flannel shirt and wool skirt, her boots muddy, her hair was tied back, and she was holding the bounty hunter's rifle. She did not point it at the man. She just held it, cradled in her arms, the muzzle pointed at the sky, but her presence was electric. "Clara," Elias said, his voice sharp. "Get back!" "Miss Shaw," the man said, his face breaking in a relieved smile. "Thank God. It is all right, ma'am. I have got him. You are safe." "I have been safe for months," Clara said, her voice clear and cold as the stream water. She walked forward, standing not behind Elias, but beside him. "Ma'am?" the man said, his smile faltering. "You heard my husband," Clara said. The word fell into the valley like a stone. Husband. Elias's head turned, his eyes locking on her, a look of stunned, fierce wonder on his face. "That paper," Clara continued, nodding at the warrant, "is a lie, written by a coward. You are trespassing." "Now, ma'am," the man stammered, his gun wavering between Elias and this impossible woman. You must be confused. This savage, This man," Clara interrupted, "is building our home. This is our land, and you are not welcome here. I have a duty." "You have no duty here." Clara's voice was flat. She was not angry. She was simply stating a fact. The law, in your town, is a whisper, a rumor. It is lies told by men like my cousin. Out here, the law is the wind, and the stone, and the winter, and us. You are one man. We are two. You are a long way from home. She lifted the rifle. Her hands were steady. She did not point it at his chest. She pointed it at the ground, just in front of his horse. And then she cocked it. The sound, the click-clack of the hammer, was louder than a gunshot. It was the sound of the bounty hunter's final moment. It was the sound of a final choice. The deputy stared. He looked at Clara's face, cold and set as the granite cliffs. He looked at Elias, who had not moved, his rifle still aimed at the man's heart. He was trapped between two people who were not afraid of him, who were not afraid of anything. He saw the truth. He was not a rescuer. He was an intruder, and he realized, very likely to die. His face, which had been red with authority, went pale. He lowered his revolver, slowly, and stuffed it back into his holster.
This is madness,
he whispered. No, Clara said. This is our home. The man pulled hard on his reins, turning his horse in a clumsy circle. You will regret this. The law will. Go, Elias said. The man kicked his horse, scrambling back toward the pass. He did not look back. They watched until the sound of his horse's hooves faded, until the silence of their valley returned, broken only by the wind in the pines. Clara let out a breath she had been holding for a minute. The rifle felt impossibly heavy. She lowered it. Elias turned to her. He did not speak. He just looked at her, his pale eyes full of a storm of emotions she could not begin to name: pride, love, awe. He had seen her captive soul fire. Now, he had seen it blaze. He had been ready to kill again, to protect their life. But she had saved him from it. She had used her words, her strength, her will. She had been the shield. He reached out and took the rifle from her hands. He set it down. Then he pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her so tightly she could barely breathe. He buried his face in her hair, and his body was trembling. He, who had never trembled, was shaking. That night, the cabin was still just walls. The air was sharp with the coming cold of evening. They sat inside the canvas tent, the one they had built together. The small fire outside cast their shadows against the canvas wall. Two shapes, joined as one. Elias held her, his back against his saddle, her head on his chest. He was stroking her hair, his hand moving in the slow, comforting rhythm she had come to know as peace. She had never felt so safe. She was not the girl from Ohio. She was not the captive. She was not the grieving survivor. She was just Clara. She was home. She lifted her head and looked at him.
Elias,
she whispered. He looked down, his eyes clear in the firelight. You loosened more than ropes, she said, her voice thick. She touched his face. You set me free. Thank you for listening to our story. We would love to hear where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below to connect with other listeners. Subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in English.